All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Kristin Pepper with First Data, and we're here to discuss building a foundation for modular procurements. Our agenda for today is provided here, and without further delay, let me go into introductions. Like I said, I'm Kristin Pepper, and I have Marianne Kennedy, who is our resident expert in modular procurements with First Data, specializing in health and human services. We have Melody Hayes from Department of Healthcare Services and Peter Kelly from CWDS. I'm going to turn this over to Marianne Kennedy, and she will be doing the discussion for the modular procurements, and then I will be facilitating the panelist discussion with Peter and Melody. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. We're going to be talking about several areas today around the idea of modular procurements. You know, as we all know, modular, many, multiples. It is really an expansion of what we've had to deal with in the past. So we're going to talk about how this is going to impact in terms of your planning and your planning for your procurement and ensuring your organization is going to be ready. So we're going to cover governance, a procurement roadmap, operational assessment, and change management, one of my favorite topics. Okay, governance. When you're looking at modularity, one of the things that becomes apparent is that decisions need to be made at an appropriate level. The key thing when you're looking at these multiple procurements, you're not dealing with one procurement or two procurements or one or two vendors. You may be looking at 6, 8, 10, or even 12, depending on how big your initiative and your program is. So you need to understand that these types of procurements and the projects themselves have a lot of cross dependencies. And that may require that some decisions can be made at the project level, but a lot are going to need to be looked at a program level and looked at for cross dependencies. Unfortunately, we would all wish that these modules we would go out and procure and put together for our big enterprise solutions would all fit together like Legos. You know, you just put them together, they go click, click, click. We all know it takes a lot more coordination than that to actually implement these major programs. The other thing we want to look at, and we'll talk about with our panel here, will be governance, not only at the program level, but at the enterprise level. Because many times we're looking at procurements and we're looking at solutions that aren't just for your program per se. You have to interface with other agencies and other projects going on in other groups. And so again, that dependency and how you manage your cross dependencies across programs, across agencies, is very important to be able to deliver in a timely and aligned way. Procurement roadmap. Well, we all have been working on our as-is, our to-bes, all these visions of what things should look like. And as far as we know, the procurement part of it, that's just as important to know the roadmap for that. We have the as-is and the to-be, but being able to put together those procurements, put together the RFPs, understand the requirements that are dependent between one procurement and another, having them in the right order and the right sequence is extremely important to be able to actually get the procurements out and be able to deliver on time. And then, does it align with all the latest we have to have in terms of our new standards for the state agencies, the federal, whether we're going to a new cloud solution for federal, whether we're going to a SaaS solution, a COTS solution. And the other part of looking at your roadmap is doing some analysis in your marketplace. As we've gotten into new areas, whether we're going to a COTS or a product type solution, one of the things that's become apparent is some of these are fairly new concepts for them to be truly interoperable, a SaaS solution. This may be a new product for that company, a new offering. So you need to understand and work with those potential vendors, maybe through RFIs or other mechanisms, to understand when they're going to have availability of the features you need so that you can actually look at how you will sequence your roadmap for your procurements. Because sometimes you have to change things. So the only thing I can really say about any of this is when you're dealing with modular, you need to be flexible. because there are going to be changes. So there may be changes in terms of your sequence, your dependencies, your timing, and even the types of different procurements you do. So are you ready? This is really kind of a checklist that we've gone through and looked at from different parts of the organization to say, are you really ready to be able to take on the procurements and the implementations and the projects that go behind it? First of all, for a lot of different parts of the state and the organizations, you're looking at COTS solutions or actually built solutions you can configure, SaaS solutions, cloud solutions. There's a big paradigm shift there. And is the organization ready to change their processes, potentially the roles of the people in the organization to align with those COTS solutions? With a modular approach, we'll be talking to our panel members. You could be doing modular, not by doing it by buying products, but maybe buying and integrating, building in a modular fashion, or delivering a combination. But the one thing that happens when you're dealing with modularity is you have a tendency to want to do things fast. We think it should all fit together really quickly. And this can have a huge impact on organizations, the same group inside your organization, maybe with multiple projects coming at them at the same time. And so you need to have that analyzed and looked at in terms of your staffing inside these organizations. Do you have enough of the right skills? Do you need to have more technical people with new skill sets to deal with these new products? Do you have a program management office that is really looking at program management, not just projects? And have you really thought through the organizational changes? And then the most important part for most of us, and then do you have the money to be able to actually get the people you need? So. One of the areas, I mean, we talk about procurements, and we talk about the fact that we're going from 1 or 2 to potentially 6 or 10. Do you have enough procurement staff? Do you have enough streamlining in your processes to be able to get these through? Or are they going to be each procurement a huge lift that's going to be very difficult to do? Are there ways to do it in a process that may allow you to streamline it, make it smaller, more modular, in a way that can process through quicker? And does the legal department, we always think about the procurements and all the writing of the RFPs and the requirements, but does your legal department have enough bandwidth to review all of these documents you're going to be doing? Have you structured or done RFPs for Agile or even COTS? The writing of the requirements are very different. And you need to actually understand when you're putting those together how you're going to structure this. Contract and vendor management is another area that's going to get hit with a large volume increase in types of work. Do they have an understanding of how to deal with an agile contract structure? Are you going to be going to an agile approach? What's the state's role? How are you going to be managing 9, 10, 11 vendors instead of that 1 or 2 large vendors you've dealt with before? And then we all know that when you have multiple vendors, there's no issues with someone saying it's the other's fault or the delay is caused by somebody else. Managing the vendors will become a real artful practice. And the volume of change orders that potentially could come through. You end up with 1 change or 2 changes on a major part of your roadmap, and it can have a ripple through that could actually impact multiple procurements at the same time. Program management. So this is one of my real heart areas. Program management is not just a group of projects. It really takes a different practice when you're looking at this modular approach from the concept of planning through procurement, through implementation and delivery of how are you going to manage the projects, align them, govern them as a group in a way that they will actually come together and give you the solution you're looking for, not a bunch of different projects that are independent. So cross-dependencies, having PMO and staffing and operational areas ready for all these changes, and the tools to manage the complexity. When you're dealing with these types of plans, requirement changes, requirements management at an enterprise level, it's not something you can be doing with necessarily Visio and simple tools where you're doing drawings, and I'm sure our panel will be able to attest to some of those things. And then again, processes and governance at the right levels. My final real key part here in this section is change management. Being able to understand when you're defining your procurements, you're defining your plans, where your dependencies are, and that those are tracked at a program level carefully so that when a change happens, it could be something as simple as a month change on a delivery for one project or another, or the fact that this RFP is now not getting out the door for 2 more months because we hit a window and we have to wait for more state funding. That can have a change effect across the board, and you need to understand where those start impacting each other. And the other part of it is change management for the organization, and understanding these requirements inside and out from that interoperability, your standards. Are you using what is the current, your language of your RFPs and your procurements that are aligned with, the Department of Technology's latest and the new NIST requirements for security or privacy of information? So, the procurement department and those who are really involved with defining what you want that solution to be have a lot to look at. And last but not least, most of the time, we are not doing these implementations just for some new solution. We're doing an implementation to remove a very non-modular legacy monolithic type solution. So one of the things to look at when you're doing your planning for your procurements is to consider the changes that may need to go on to legacy during this whole transition. Key thing is you got to keep the lights on, you got to keep business operations running. And I will let you take over the questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that overview, Marianne. I think it's a really perfect introduction to really what we would like to talk about with all of the panelists and their experiences on CWS and in DHCS. I would like both Melody and Peter to kind of give you guys an overview of their projects, just so you guys have some context as to where they're at individually and, what some of the impacts may be for them.
Okay, hi, I'm Melody Hayes. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I'm the Deputy Director at DHCS for the California Medicaid Management Information System Division, so CAMMIS as it's called. So in California, the fee-for-service Medi-Cal processes approximately 350,000 claims a year for Medi-Cal provider payments as well, and for a total of about $19 billion. Very large system, large legacy system. We have an incumbent vendor who part of the contract was to replace the system with a more modern Medicaid system. In April, we ended that contract for the replacement system, so that put us into a replanning mode. We did decide to look at some of the products that they had originally bid, so we do have some modules we are continuing forward with. But what we are doing now is taking a step back and looking at our plan forward for system replacement and what will our modular replacement strategy be. So we have almost every slide in here we've already been working on for the last year, but we've been doing a lot of work around what should the organization look like, what should our strategy be for the replacement for the modules, and how will we put those procurements together in the order. And I will say for MMIS systems, and the federal government has directed states to do modular procurement. Our funding is basically 90% federal funding. So we do want to be compliant with where the federal guidance takes us. And so our kind of mantra is oversight to ownership. We no longer have a big monolithic system that's going to be brought in by one system integrator. The state will have a direct administration now of all of the solutions that will be provided for MMIS. So that means the state takes on the role of having to manage the system integration activities. So there's a lot of organizational planning we're doing around that right now. And our product roadmap for the modular procurement will be probably within another year. But right now we're really focusing on organizational readiness for this new model where the state becomes the integrator and what our organization should look like and what the needed resources will be for that.
Thank you. Peter?
Hi, Peter Kelly. This mic didn't work earlier today either, so I'll just speak loudly. My name is Peter Kelly. I'm the Deputy Director within the Office of Systems Integration for Child Welfare Digital Services. The division as it stands today was created about a year ago as our pivot from monolithic procurement to agile software development. The program that we support is technology for county social workers and related disciplines that help children that are at risk of abuse and neglect or in the foster care system. There are about 500,000 allegations of abuse and neglect every year, and that turns into, I think, about 50 or 60,000 kids under supervision in the foster care program every year. There's a large turnover, and so it's, I think, about 30,000 that are consistent from year to year. I may have the numbers off by a little bit. The system that we have today was put in place in the mid-1990s and has been maintained, but systemically remains the same technology as it was put in place 20 years ago. And so what that means is we have not really modernized the tools that we give to social workers in order to protect these children. And we have maintained the core functionality that our federal partners expect of us, but really haven't figured out how to deliver the best set of tools to social workers to be able to ensure that kids have the best chance of remaining in their home when it's safe to do so, or being removed quickly from their homes when the risk warrants doing that and putting them into the best sort of care situation possible. The continuum of care for kids in the system involves all disciplines within the social services, whether it's mental health care, physical health care, education, all those other activities that they may engage in, but our system today does not integrate with most of those systems. And so we have huge data complexity issues that we have not resolved over the years. Last November when I came on board, we were getting ready to release a procurement that the team had worked on with social workers across the state for many years. They had built what we call our monolithic or 7.5 procurement. And the administration decided not to move forward with that procurement, but rather to find a better way to deliver into the hands of social workers faster business value as quickly as possible. And that brought us into this concept of modular procurement and ultimately into software development and some of the paradigm that we have committed to, which is open software development, agile, iteratively, user-centered design with our customers to ensure that we give them the best possible outcomes as soon as we possibly can.
Great, thank you. Kind of focusing on that user-centered design concept, one of the things we've talked about being so incredibly important is governance. So I'd like for each of you to ask, what did you do to help establish the governance process or a plan within your projects? Or if one already existed, what changes were needed in order to accommodate a modular procurement?
Start. So the Child Welfare Services has a well-established governance with our county social worker and county social work departments that's been used for the better part of 20 years. The current version, I think, was updated around 2011 and still stands today. One of the things that Marianne talked about is making decisions at the appropriate level. What we like to say is making decisions at the lowest possible level. And so to that end, we just simply delegated the authority of decision-making within a release or a 90-day window to the teams that are building the product. And the teams that are building the product have representation from 6 core counties, so 6 counties across the state of California, whose business models represent the size, complexity, and scale of California at large. So that generally looks like Los Angeles being involved in every single set of digital services because they are to California what California is to the federal government in terms of the size and complexity. And then representation across the state of small, large, highly integrated, highly siloed counties that work in the space. And so with these core counties, making decisions within every 2-week sprint or iteration of software development, we have literally pushed decision-making down to the lowest possible level, but engage our governance on a quarterly basis by setting priorities and features that we want to see being developed as we move forward.
Okay, so with the CAMMIS project, the PMO function and all of the governance was outsourced to the integrator. So the immediate change for us is for us to take over the governance processes and and we had stakeholders involved that were state governance or state stakeholders, but the vendor was managing the processes, running the meetings, facilitating the risk and issue management and things like that. And so that was a significant change that the state is now going to have to take over all of that activity, and we have already begun that activity. So now in our governance meetings, we do not include our current incumbent integrator because they're no longer part of our go-forward decision-making process. We do bring them if there is a specific operational item. But so we've taken that over, and we're having to work very closely with, we have in our organization the Medicaid Information Technology Architecture Governance Process. So there is a prescribed approach for Medicaid that the federal government has laid out. And so in the federal definition, a module is not an IT system. A module is a business function. So you may have several IT components to solve a business function area. So we're working very closely with our MITA governance group to make sure that we are aligning our go-forward plans with the MITA direction and coordinating across our enterprise to make sure that any solution we look at can be, the agency motto now is leverage or be leveraged. So we're looking at any of our solutions as potentially something that can be leveraged across our department in other business areas as well as in the agency. So as we move forward, that will be part of our governance process. We will kind of bubble up through the agency, and you mentioned that in some of your slides also. So
Yeah, we did.
yeah. And so we're working very closely to as we lay out we're going through what we're calling an application rationalization. What we're trying to, for our modular procurements going forward, we're laying out the current health of all of the current legacy applications, their technical health as well as their business value. And we are going to go through a process with all of our stakeholders to validate that, and then that will help form our strategy moving forward in terms of the order of the module/business areas that are at the most risk and need the most solutions to solve their business problems, that their business problems are not being solved by the current legacy environment.
Great, thank you. So one of the questions we wanted to ask, and it's still around governance and really tied closely to this, but it's how have you engaged your management and stakeholders to achieve buy-in for the projects and or decisions that are made? So I think you both touched on this a little bit, but maybe really kind of focusing on, so like for Peter, in your situation where you have those core counties, but how do you really engage all of them and make sure that you have consensus?
So I would say that consensus, traditionally defined, plays a different role in our organization. We have delegated the authority to these core counties to make decisions on behalf of the other counties. So we're not looking for consensus statewide, we're looking for consensus among this team. And the job then is to demonstrate to all of our users broadly what it is that we're doing, right? Give them a mechanism to be engaged. And so one of the very first things that our product owner for the first digital service team did was recognize he needed a feedback mechanism broadly, right? We could take emails in, but would that give us adequate ability to capture that feedback? And so we do a demonstration of our product in the open at the end of every 2-week sprint. Our digital service team that's building the intake product started doing that here just about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And it's open to all of the counties to participate in. They can provide their feedback, and that feedback then goes to those 6 core county members and our product owner that can look at that broadly across the roadmap and understand, do we need to make decisions today to change that or not? But I think what's so important about user-centered design is we're putting researchers and developers out into the field with customers directly. Rather than saying, here, this is the solution we're going to give to you, what do we need to change about it to meet your needs? We're literally saying, how do you do your work today? What's painful about that? If you could have something that would be better, what would it be? And then figuring out how to build that incrementally for them. So the notion of getting consensus and buy-in, I think, just changes fundamentally in the conversation. As soon as you're saying, I'm not going to be fighting with you about trade-offs all the way along, I'm going to let you make the decisions about what are most important to you. Recognizing you have this much time and this much throughput to get work done, you now as the customer need to prioritize what are the most important things for you. On top of that, our social workers are amazingly committed to the work that they do. and they're amazingly overworked, frankly, too. So I believe what we're seeing is that they are prioritizing those things that are their biggest pain points first, because they want tangible, functional output. The system was built before mobile devices existed. They still don't have the ability in many counties to have data live with them in the field, and so buy-in is implicit in the process.
Okay, great.
So I think a little compare and contrast. So in the MMIS space, there are some mature products and there are some evolving products that are addressing some of the modularity and functionality issues. So our approach will be a little different. It won't be a customized build. We want it to meet the user's needs, but it will not have a lot of customization. Our goal is to implement as close as possible to the products as they are, with California configurations, but we still do want to have positive user experiences. But what our approach has been to date, so ours has really been around the planning for the organizational change, and we've developed a 7-year roadmap for how we are going to move the organization forward with this change to modular, and the state taking the ownership role and direct administration of the integration. And we've socialized that. We started through our internal at our department. We've gone through our entire governance layer. So we went through our department, we went through all of our governance committees, and we went to our state control agencies and then to our federal control agencies. And we've just, everybody is aware. We've been very transparent of our approach and how we are approaching this transformation for our organization. And so I think the key to the buy-in has been to communicate often. So every step of the way we communicated our strategy, then we communicated the roadmap, then we communicated the go-forward plan. We developed a concept of operations, which describes the organization and how it's going to operate, the current organization and the to-be organization, and the roles that are changing for the state and how the state is going to be operating in the future. Our next deliverable after we've got the organization set up will be that product roadmap, and then we'll be talking with our stakeholders about the priorities of those modules, as I said before. But we're focused really on getting the organization ready for this change.
Okay, great. And that's actually a wonderful segue into my next question, which is, can each of you talk about your defined sequence for your procurements and any development and constraints you had that may have been from the legacy systems?
Yeah, and as I said, we're still kind of really in the very front-end planning, other than the modules that we're already implementing that were either in flight or were deemed as priorities, and they were actually, the ones we are doing were actually in the queue to be the first things rolled out if we had stayed with the original contract. So we're consistent with the priorities of the organization. So other than those, we're going to finish this application rationalization and evaluation effort, and then we will be going back to our stakeholders to confirm the priority of the systems that are at most risk, and then the business functionality that needs to be addressed, and then we will be developing that product roadmap from there.
And we looked at where we could provide the most business value at the lowest risk initially, where we're also looking at the technical complexity of delivery. So our goal for implementing was to wrap the existing legacy system with an API so that we could develop sets of functionality to coexist with and eventually strangle off and entirely replace. So part of that is proving that we can do the API wrapper around the existing system, biting off some significant technical complexity. It might not seem like a 20-year-old system would be highly complicated, but what happens along the roadmap is that certain technology skills come and go, and about 20 years later you look back and you wonder, why do people do things that way? I no longer have the skills to engage in that particular business because the rest of the world has evolved and we've stayed the same. And so when we worked with groups like Code for American 18F early on, they didn't have an appreciation for how complicated some of our legacy integration would be, because they never assumed that people would still be doing things that way. So we started with, just a quick aside, we have over 1 billion document segments in the CWDS CMS database. Not a billion documents, but segments of documents. And that's because the Visual Basic 6 client application, I'm told, breaks documents down into 32K increments before it sends it off to the CICS, integration, which further breaks it down, and I'm not looking at you, Scott, intentionally, sorry. But I saw your eyebrows raised. And then CICS further breaks that down into 4K increments before it transmits it back to the mainframe. Well, instead of then reassembling it back before putting it in the database, they just stored that document in 4K increments into the database. Both of those use proprietary and different encryption. So in order to be able to pull documents back out of the database, we have to solve that problem. No one would ever possibly think that would be a problem you should have to solve in 2016. So we started with intake being kind of the upfront loading activity that takes a phone call from someone that has seen something or is alleging abuse. It helps a social worker work through a series of decisions to determine what should we do with this allegation. And then it stores information that then becomes a case or not. But it also requires getting to this data that's in the legacy system, because children that are at risk of abuse or neglect often have already been abused, or the person that is doing the abusing was prior in the system. Right? There's a vicious cycle that often occurs. And so we took business value, we took technical complexity, we smashed them together, and we came out with the first couple of things, with the caveat that the roadmap will change. Not that it can, that it will change, because as we go through work with our customers, the things that add value to them will become more apparent the closer you get to them, and their understanding of the challenges will also evolve, and so our roadmap will change as we go through the process.
All right, thank you. How do you plan to manage the fiscal components based upon the state budgeting processes?
Very carefully. Can I take a first crack at it?
Yours is more complex.
Big cup of water.
So we talked about this in the session here in this room earlier this morning, and that is when we put together a traditional project plan under the old FSR SPR model, there is, I think, an agreement of all parties to believe that that information is accurate while knowing that it is not, right? And we see that on large projects that are hundreds of millions of dollars, that they average 7 or more SPRs over the life cycle, and as Ben Flores sitting next to me said, or 17, that there is expectations change, the cost of delivery changes, the things that we know about the project become more clear as time progresses. The closer you are to something, the better your estimate will be. And so no one has ever, in my opinion, from the data, accurately forecasted 10 years in the future what's going to happen. So instead, we're trying to change the conversation. Now, I'll say we have not been highly successful. I think that the legislature still has an expectation of old, but they have engaged in conversation to say that user-centered design, modular delivery makes sense, but we don't yet have an answer on how to change the fiscal funding formula that goes along with that and the process. So all that we can do, and what we've committed to doing, is doing a budget change proposal and a spring finance letter every year to keep our estimates as we know them at any given point in time as accurate as possible. Sometimes that'll be an increase, sometimes it'll be a decrease. We'll do associated project reporting documents to go along with it as we go. If that means I need to do 2 SPRs a year, I'll do 2 SPRs a year for the purpose of transparency and communication. With the ask then that people keep an open mind that we don't have all of the data. The best way to estimate future outcomes is through empirical data, and we'll have that when we complete our first digital service and implement it. I will then be able to better forecast the future, because I will be using like data to forecast like activities in the future.
Thank you. Nadi?
So for our organizational change that we're talking about, we do have a budget request that went in, so we did get in time for this year's budget for that. But for the future modules, we're really watching closely what's going to happen with CWS, because I agree, you may know 1 year out, but you're not going to know the 5-year out view. We are going to try to put together a estimate of the order of the solutions and the modules, but again, that could change the same way as if there's a changing business need or something changes dramatically, we would want to have the flexibility to change that up also. And the whole idea of the modular with COTS or SaaS solutions is, and well, the feds say this, I'm not sure how easy it would be, but the idea is you can unplug one and plug the other one in. They say that a lot when we have the conversations at the national level, so that you're supposed to be able to have kind of the ability to quickly change out a solution if one didn't work or you wanted to replace it quickly. So we're going to build our roadmap. We're going to build our approach. We're going to then work very closely with our state and federal control agencies about the best way to look at how to fund. The feds are a little easier because you can do money as needed. It's not quite as you can do an annual request and you can update it as needed. On the state side, we're bound by that annual budget process, which is really challenging when you have dynamic projects that can change. But we're going to watch very closely what they're doing. So.
Okay, great. I want to transition really quickly over to your organizations. So how has modular procurement and iterative development impacted your organizations?
Dramatically. The organization, in my opinion, at CWDS looks nothing today like it did 12 months ago when we started. Please do not underestimate the effort involved in organizational change management and taking your staff together on a journey from where you start to whatever your end goal looks like. Modular procurement, or in our case, doing numerous smaller procurements versus one large procurement has really changed a lot of the burden of the work. So our procurement shop is taking on a lot more work than they ever anticipated in a more steady state sort of scenario. It's also required our engagement with our control agencies and our legal to become much more real time. And I think we've been fairly successful in doing that, but through commitment of having ongoing conversations about what we're trying to achieve, how we can all come together around that, people being very vocal and honest about what their needs are so that we can understand if what we're doing are going to achieve those outcomes. With regard to iterative development, it means that we have to become a better buyer, right? The state doesn't have all of the skill sets that it needs to develop the software, so we're having to procure services of development, but that means that we have to know what we're buying. We need to make sure that we are getting the sorts of outcomes that we want, and ultimately that we need to build some of those skills in order to be able to continue to participate in development activities. I think probably the biggest change has been bringing business and technical folks much more closely together. And we're seeing that now as we work on the first set of digital services, that the interaction is happening on a micro, within the day level, as opposed to, here, you write something down, we'll go take care of it and bring it back to you and hope we got it right. Now it's a give and take at a conversational level that I think is going to get us far better outcomes.
Great. Melody?
Yeah, same thing. It's a significant change for us, and this is all across the country, really, for every state doing MMIS. But so we're looking at that organizational transformation. We have recognized the need for a much stronger vendor management organization and also a much stronger contract and procurement organization. So part of our request that's going forward this year is to resource those activities, as well as a much more robust PMO, because now the state's going to own the PMO. And then looking at how we're going to manage integration. So we have a whole approach that we're putting forward right now to our control agencies around how we want to approach that. But it's going to be similar challenges. The organizational change management, we've been doing a lot of work in our organization already to bring our organization along, our internal, and then with all of our stakeholders every step of the way in our planning and in our approach, we've been engaging our department, our agency, and our state and federal control agencies. So we're trying to keep everybody engaged and bought into the approach that we're taking. And so far we've had good support, and I don't anticipate that that's going to change. It's a very repeatable process. So we're just keeping everybody engaged in what we're doing.
Well, I'd like to save a couple minutes for questions, but just quickly, what has worked well for you, and then what has been your greatest challenge?
Boy, everything has been a challenge. No, I mean, everything we're doing is a little bit different than it used to be, and so one of the things that's exciting, but it's also, I think, frustrating, is what's going to be next, right? The unknown. The fact that I'm asking people to make decisions they've never had to make before. The fact that we're having to learn new skills we've never had to experience before. The fact that we're working with control agencies in ways that we've never been before. But through all of those challenges, everything that we do, it's a little bit different than it used to be. The fact is the administration has dramatically supported this, from the decision to make the change all the way through. And so whereas it can be frustrating and challenging, I know at the end of the day I get to get back together with our secretary and undersecretary every quarter. It was just last night, to brief them on what's going on. And their statement, which is, the answer can be yes, it can be yes, but it cannot be no. So let's work to figure out how we make this happen for the state so that we can serve these children in the best way possible.
So I think what worked really well for us, one of the things I didn't mention before is with the end of the replacement project, our the incumbent is also supporting the legacy operations and business operations. And with our settlement agreement, the contract ends in 2019. So we were originally starting down a modular planning path that we thought we had till 2022. So we ended up having to really take a real quick step back about how do we ensure our legacy operations are going to continue, because we don't believe we can do a full replacement of everything we have in 3 years. And so we have to make sure that our legacy is secure. So that means some additional procurement support as well as the modular procurement support that we're going to do. But I think what was really worked well is the stakeholder buy-in. We were able to very concisely present the issues and the risks and the procurement issues and the issues around our legacy system and the need to make sure that we had an organization in place to be successful. So I think what went really well is we had the buy-in of all of our stakeholders on the need to do the work that we've put forward in our go-forward plan and how we want to set the organization moving forward. What has been the challenge and is the organizational change. So both internally, we getting the staff kind of on board. We've had a series of town halls and open campuses, and we've done a strategic plan that we've shared out. But just bringing everybody along. I think at the executive level, we've got the support, but it comes down to all the people on the team that have to be able to implement this and understand the vision. So we are really focused on how are we going to manage organizational change as we move forward, because it's going to be a very significant change for our organization.
I wanted to open it up to anyone in the audience who had any questions. Yes?
Hi. This question is for Peter. It's sort of a two-part question based on one of your answers. You'd indicated that you coordinate your product owner to facilitate with the 6 counties. In my understanding of typical agile development, a product owner is a senior person in the business who has the understanding of the various business components to be able to make that decision. How have you facilitated that particular role across the entire spectrum of what the business is trying to do? And then another part to your answer, you'd indicated that you have your developers working in the counties with them. Are the developers that are working with the counties directly with them, are they part of the 2-week sprints, or are they trying to work outside of that structure? And how, if they are outside and not co-located, have you been able to make that work? Thank you.
So our product owners are, as you described, generally senior people that have the business expertise required. They generally don't have technical product owner experience because that's not something that social services or a lot of the counties have brought to bear in the past. So we're working to upskill them in that regard. We are recruiting specifically for domain knowledge as well as executive awareness, right? The ability to distill those topics down to or up to the appropriate level. And so on our first digital service, the intake functionality, we've taken a couple of plays from other government organizations. We've taken a play out of the UK digital service model where we have a service manager. And the service manager will be responsible for the totality of delivering that digital service. So in this case, the intake, emergency response, screening activity, coordinating everything required in order to make that happen holistically for the customers. That person comes to us from a county as a contracted county employee that has broad and deep experience and knowledge in that space. And then the product owner that works directly with her is an ex-social worker that has this experience, that has been engaged on the project team for some time. And so between the two of them, what we're hoping to find is that we have both the external executive awareness as well as the product capability. The product owner literally is sitting, as of I think late last week, at a table side by side with developers day in and day out. The service manager is brand new into the function, and so she's still getting up to speed on what that's going to look like, but making sure that we have broad engagement. So the core county representatives are not to stand in lieu of the product owner, but to be able to be a direct connection to get feedback and information to make sure that as we're making centralized decisions about the product, we're doing that in the context of what do our customers need, recognizing that I'm not building a commercial product where I don't always have to take my customers' consideration and need. I have to make sure they're bought in, right? Even if we don't have consensus, we have strong alignment with all of the counties. So I think that was the first part to the answer. And the second one was, I'm sorry, I lost it.
That's right. You indicated that you had your
Oh, the research, yes.
out in the field.
So we asked our development partners to bring not only software development expertise, but user research and user design thinking to bear. And so we have 3 user researchers on the development team, and I think 5 developers and a lead developer, so that makes 6. The researchers are bridging that gap, right? So they're not requirements analysts, they're literally user experience researchers that are skilled in this more modern way of doing it, and they are attempting to act in front of and in parallel with the development activity. So they are housed out of our facility, but they go on to road trips, and they go out to the county, and I think they've been in LA and Santa Cruz, and they're in YOLO this week or next week. Whereas the dev team is operating on 2-week sprints. They're on site. We're working with them face to face, and the product owner and the business team are there and available to them in real time.
Unfortunately, we are out of time for additional questions. But I would like to thank everyone for attending and for Peter and Melody for being our panelists today. We have provided each of you a handout as a takeaway. We do have some extras up at the front table if you need any others. Thank you.